Microphones, everybody, just be aware. I'm going to call to order the Planning Commission meeting in City Hall here, 501 Laurel Street, Council Chambers for Wednesday, July 19th, 2023. Mr. Kramvik, would you please call the roll?
Marone.
Here.
Gorham.
Here.
Duval.
Here.
Norwood.
Here.
Grunwald.
Here.
Stangline.
Here.
Yeager.
Yes. Item number 3, Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands,
One
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first thing on our agenda here is an approval of the agenda for this evening. This is item number 4. Do we have any additions, changes, substitutions for the agenda? All right, hearing none, I'll be looking for a motion to approve.
So moved?
A motion by Stangline and a second by
Second, Norwood.
Norwood. Very good. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Very good, we have an agenda. First item on our agenda is number 5. This is an approval of the minutes. This is for our regular meeting that was held on June 21st, special meeting held on July 12th, I think, yes. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved, Norwood.
Got a motion to
Second.
approve and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, we have an approval, motion carries approval of the minutes. Okay, item number 6, this is, we're going to jump into our unfinished business here. The first is item 6A. This is a letter for the D.W. Jones requesting public art for the 805 Laurel Street. We got just a sample letter here. Pretty easy to read, but James, please give us just the brief overview on this, if you would, please. This is not an action item unless we want to make any adjustments or amendments to the letter as it will be submitted. And I appreciate all of you looking out on my behalf since it's my name on it. Go ahead, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Planning Commission directed staff to write a letter to D.W. Jones on behalf of the Planning Commission to request a public art piece as part of the 805 Laurel Street project. Staff has included a draft of that letter and would like Planning Commission to discuss and recommend any changes to the letter.
All right, very good. The letter was not particularly lengthy. If you all had a chance to read it, that's great. If not, no big deal. But this would be the letter that we'd be sending out just requesting some information, as I believe it was Mr. Duval who brought this originally to the attention of the commission. Great idea here. And unless anybody has any objections, we'll approve this letter and I'll sign it and we'll send it out and see what happens.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
I would encourage an additional sentence in here, probably following the next to the last sentence in the last paragraph, to the effect of, I encourage you to reach out to the Crossing Arts Alliance or other art organizations and institutions in our community and region. Just basically that they don't have to necessarily own the search but again, if we can think of them providing the canvas and working with the arts community to be able to fulfill what's on that canvas. So
Very good. Awesome. Yeah, it seems, yes, please.
Well, no, I was wondering, because I had the same thought, really. Don't we have some, like, a rack card or something, or that we can throw in with the letter? If not, I could run and get one.
Some type of what card?
Like a rack card or like, from the crossing. We're the crossing. Here's how to get a hold of us.
Yeah, we could probably include something like that in there.
Yeah.
Yep, some information on that.
So that because like, if I got this out of the blue, and I know that Skip's not getting this out of the blue, but I wouldn't know what am I supposed to do with this? And I think pointing them in that direction is the right way to go.
Yep, I think that certainly adds some value to the letter.
Yeah. To your point, and I'll just jump in also, to your point, Mr. Duval, I know that the Five Wings Arts Council is an initiative that works with artists, and they have, in many cases, money available to partner with people who want to put art in their locations. We did this for the library over here with their art, and so it might be good just to put them on there also, so that Skip's not 100% working on his own on this, but there may be actually somebody else out there who might pay for it. So just put it on his property. So those seems to make good sense to me. Any other thoughts or additions to this? Got what you need, James?
And we got what we need.
Very good. Thank you very much. And yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. We're going to continue on to our new business, and our first item is item 7A. This is the consideration of an IUP and interim use permit for a short-term rental at 515 9th Street South. Dylan, would you please just kind of give us the rundown on this, and then James, follow up with Dylan if you have anything, please?
Perfect. Thank you and good evening. Thank you and good evening. We are here to discuss an interim use permit for a short-term rental applied for by Stangler Properties LLC at 515 9th Street South, Brainerd. This is a parcel that lies in a traditional neighborhood 2 zoning district. Adjacent uses are duplex rentals, single-family residential rental and non-rental, as well as the Sharing Bread Soup Kitchen. All of the other adjacent properties are also traditional neighborhood 2. Included in the packet, you can see an aerial map of where we're looking at. Findings of fact. We note that this is located in a traditional neighborhood 2 zoning district, and that according to our table of uses, Appendix A, short-term rentals are an interim use in that zoning district. In order for an interim use to be granted in this zoning district, short-term rentals must comply with the following minimum standards as required by the section of code. The maximum rental period shall not be more than 28 consecutive nights. The applicant proposes the unit as a short-term rental that will not exceed 28 consecutive nights for a rental period. The permit holder/owner of a short-term rental must apply for and receive an interim use permit. This application and process that we are currently going through constitutes the applicant's attempt to apply for an interim use permit for the operation of a short-term rental. The application for an interim use permit shall include the number of bedrooms with dimensions and all other sleeping accommodations. I will read through these parts and then go through them a little more holistically because this application includes a lot of redundancies. So we have the number of bedrooms with dimensions and all other sleeping accommodations, the number of off-street parking spaces available to guests, all accessory structures, outdoor recreational features available for guest use, a pet, garbage, and noise policy, and the permit holder shall post emergency contact information, police, fire, hospital, and show renters the location of fire extinguishers in the short-term rental unit. Included in each of these, we have that the proposed short-term rental is a 900 square foot unit with 2 bedrooms. Those bedrooms are 13 feet by 12 feet 6 inches and 10 feet by 12 feet 3 inches. That will become important later, as according to occupancy for short-term rentals, there's a limit of not more than 3 people per bedroom. According to section 404.4.1 of the Property Maintenance Code, each bedroom shall contain not less than 70 square feet, and every bedroom occupied by more than one person shall contain not less than 50 square feet of floor area for each occupant thereof, or whichever is less. Thus, the one bedroom is 162 square feet, the other is 122 square feet. Both of those exceed the 100 square foot requirement on those guest rooms. Thus, the number of bedrooms and the dimensions that are not only included, are included, but they are also valid considerations for bedrooms in a short-term rental. The number of off-street parking places, as noted in the rules for the particular rental,
we have 2 off-street parking spaces available, 1 allocated in the driveway and 1 in an alley-loaded garage. The only accessory structure available for use is the garage, and the rules policy for the short-term rental clearly states that there are no pets allowed in the short-term rental property. Garbage and recycling bins for use are located at the rear of the property and collected every 7 days by Waste Partners, and that there is a quiet hours imposed between 10 p.m. and 8 p.m. The housing inspector, upon inspection of the rental unit, will also confirm that any emergency information is posted at the unit. Permit holder must disclose in writing to their renters the following information: contact information, managing agent or contact's name, address, and phone number. And the agent shall be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whenever the property is being rented. And property contact will always be accessible to the public on the City of Brainerd website. Our applicant, Mr. Stangler, is the responsible party and resides within 50 miles of the premises, which is required for an agent. Occupancy and the maximum allowed guests is listed within the rules as has been previously discussed. Vehicles, maximum number of vehicles, recreational vehicles, and trailers allowed on the property, which needs to be noted, and the rules clearly state that renters are not allowed to park more than 2 vehicles at the premises at any one time in designated off-street areas. This would also include vehicles such as trailers, as referenced. Barring any further questions, it is at this point no written communication has been put forward to the Community Development Director or our department with concerns on this interim use permit. Yes, I'll hand over to James for a discussion of staff recommendations.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. James, please.
Yeah, so Dylan has kind of summarized the findings of fact there. What I'll be discussing is just kind of a refresher on interim use permits and kind of the difference between a conditional use permit and interim use. So interim uses are similar to conditional uses in which they are allowed provided they meet the conditions. The city may attach whatever reasonable conditions are deemed necessary to mitigate anticipated adverse impacts associated with the proposed use. So really the primary difference between an IUP versus a CUP is that an IUP can impose a date or event that will terminate the use. Also, a change in the city's zoning regulations can render the use non-conforming, and it terminates the interim use. So those are a couple of the big differences. Staff did forward an email from Councilmember Johnson with concerns about the short-term rental in opposition to the IUP. Kind of a summary of that email from Councilman Johnson is the EDA, believing Stangler was building long-term housing, awarded Stangler Properties $60,000 of government funds to create the housing Stangler Properties proposed. Stangler Properties accepted the money to build housing. I oppose the interim use permit because I believe both units of this government financed duplex should be long-term housing options for people in our community. Staff certainly understands the concerns from Councilman Johnson. Housing is something that Brainerd certainly is short on right now and is a major issue facing the city. And it is also an important goal of the comprehensive plan. However, based on review of the land use applications and the findings of fact, 515 South 9th Street has met all the conditions for a short-term rental, and staff recommends approval of the interim use permit with the following conditions. First one is an approved inspection by the fire marshal. I believe Dave Cox was going to be reaching out to Mr. Stangler for that final review. The fire marshal is required to do a yearly inspection on short-term rentals. Second condition is submittal of the local option sales tax form to the finance department, which is a requirement of the interim use. And number 3, upon sale of the property by Mr. Stangler by Stangler Properties LLC, the interim use permit for a short-term rental at 515 9th Street South Brainerd, Minnesota is no longer valid. So with that, certainly can answer any questions from the commission. And Mr. Stangler is here if you have any questions for the applicant.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Kramvik. Commission members, do we have any questions for staff, either Mr. Edwards or Mr. Kramvik at this time? Yes, please, Mr. Corum.
Is this the third time we've gone through this in the last 2 years, or is it the second time? 'Cause I know we discussed the property before.
So this property has gone through 2 variance requests. The
Okay.
first one expired, came in for a variance request because that first one expired for essentially the same thing. They were approved both times. And then this one is for the short-term rental.
Okay,
Did you mean short-term rentals or just this property?
well, just this property.
Because I think it's 3 on short-term rentals also, if I'm not mistaken, right?
And then we've gone through, or at least since I've been here, a short-term rental on First Street, and then 2 of them on South Sixth Street in the same unit as a triplex.
Okay.
Very good. Any other questions for staff?
Mr. Chair, I have,
please.
I've got one, and it's on the third condition. I understand, and I've seen cities do this where they say on sale of the property or transfer of the property. This is owned by a LLC though, right?
That's correct.
So someone could buy the LLC and you could transfer that.
Essentially, yeah, you could transfer it from a
Yeah.
company.
Okay. So this is really not a condition.
If that were to be the case, that they'd actually buy the LLC.
Okay. I'm, yeah. Did our attorney, like, look at that third condition and all? Like, is that something you would run by him or not? Because it seems like a thing that we couldn't do, but I've seen cities do it. I'm just wondering if.
I didn't run it by the city attorney. Certainly, there can be a triggering effect or an end date for an interim use permit.
Yeah.
So that was my rationale behind it, but
It's just, in general, you can't attach conditions to individuals. So, like, I can say, like, I wouldn't allow you to do it, but I'd allow you to do it. It becomes problematic.
yeah, I could certainly run it by the city attorney before
I'm
we
just
go to
wondering if we
council.
really even want to do it because, like I said, if you were going to transfer it, you would just sell the LLC and keep the name. Okay, I'm with you. I don't care either way. I just was interested in the thought process.
Yep, I think that's definitely a good comment there.
Okay.
Very good. Any other questions for staff? Okay. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing. It is 6:17, and we'll invite anyone who might like to come forward, including the applicant. You don't have to, but if you would like to, you can come forward. I'm assuming we don't have anyone online. No one online, so that leaves only you. If you'd like to come forward, again, you don't have to. But at this time, the public hearing is now open, and invite you forward if you'd like.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just state your name and address, please, for the record here.
My name is Eric Stangler. My address is 7384 Lone Oak Road in Brainerd. And so we just built this property last fall, and, well, I guess I'll address one thing. Stangler Properties is, like, I started that with one little house, and we own many properties. It's going to get passed on to my kids. It's never going to be sold. It's not like we're a huge corporation. But as far as this property goes, our intent was always the same, and that was to rent for extended stay to traveling nurses and doctors or techs or whoever may be coming to the hospital. My wife worked in the ER, OR, several different locations from Essentia to Cuyuna Regional Medical Center and the Brainerd Lake Surgery Center. And we saw that there was a huge need for, like, those people that were traveling to stay. So that was why we initially came up with the plan to build this property. Now, when we found out that there was a grant that was available that did not have any strings attached to it, and we could, get that money, I think there's over 20 HUD programs, but they all have specific requirements for what you can use that property for. And this grant didn't have that. So I understand the council member's concern, but as far as us meeting the requirements, I guess I don't really see the logic. So the other thing is, the traveling nurses, they go on a 13-week rotation. So we filled the one unit right away. The second unit didn't fill. So all we're trying to do really is bridge the gap. So our intent is not to keep this as an Airbnb for as long as we own the property. It's to get us to where we can keep turning over extended stay traveling nurses, doctors, or techs. And so that's the intent. I know it's kind of, we furnish the units and, we got a lot of extra money stuck into them. If we're going to do a long-term rental, we wouldn't have done that. So we and we can't go 13 weeks without renting out an entire unit. So that's why we're applying for the interim use, to get us to the point where we hopefully can find traveling nurses, doctors, whoever it may be, to occupy the unit.
Very good. Thank you. Do we have any questions for our applicant? Just hang out just one sec, just in case. Yes, please.
Sure. Can I restate what you said and just make sure that I understand?
Sure.
You're doing 13-week rentals to nurses, but if you've got one that doesn't fill, you'd like the option of being able to do short-term rental until you get the next 13-week one in.
Well, so this is a 2-unit building, so the one unit
Yeah.
filled right away.
Yeah.
And this one did not. So
Right.
we're applying for the permit to get us to the point where we can find somebody that will fill that. So our turnover with the nurses, we had a doctor that was doing clinicals here first, then we had a nurse, and then that nurse actually found another traveling nurse. So we didn't really have any gap. Well, the other unit hasn't filled, so we're applying for the permit so that we can at least generate some sort of income out of that until we get to that point, which hopefully we do.
Until you get to having a traveling nurse or someone in there.
Correct.
Okay.
And a little bit of background, I mean, we bought the first short-term rental ever in Ironton, the Cuyuna Bike House, and operated that for a few years. And then we sold that and turned a couple of smaller units like these in Crosby into short-term units. And it's not all that it's cracked up to be. Yes, it makes a little bit more money. We're trying to transition even the ones in Crosby into these extended stays because there's so many travelers coming into our communities and they're staying at hotels. And this is better for them and it's better for the community, in my opinion.
Good. Any other questions for the applicant? Yes, please, Mr.
Sure.
Duval.
Thank you. Mr. Stangler, so you're describing that you've had difficulty attracting qualifying long-term applicants. Is that what you're implying for the one unit that remains vacant? Or
Yes. So the intent is to do, basically the nurses, doctors, techs work when they're traveling. They're on a 13-week schedule. So, and those come in waves. So we filled the one unit. We haven't been able to fill this unit, and that's why we're applying for the interim use.
could you describe, what your efforts have been to try and attract qualified applicants for the housing unit?
Well, like I said, my wife worked in the medical field here all over the city, Baxter, Crosby, and so she's put out a lot of feelers with people that are still friends that she has that still work in those areas. We've also contacted the, I forget the title now, but basically who manages the travelers at the hospital. And, if you have somebody that's interested, point them our way. And we just have not been able to fill this unit. We haven't filled the other two. We had one traveler over in Crosby, and then that fizzled out. So it's been an uphill battle, but I think we're still optimistic that we can get all 4 units filled with travelers and do that in a way that is beneficial for the community and the hospital and the travelers, so they're not staying in hotels while they're here.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
It seems like you're targeting a fairly narrow segment of potential renters for a couple bedroom bath units, which are very desirable rental units in the city of Brainerd. I'm wondering to what degree you're open to broadening your potential list of candidates to go beyond the medical professionals to other families within the city or coming to the city for long-term and looking for long-term rental. What are your thoughts on broadening that that pool of people that you'd be trying to attract to fill your unit?
We're 100% open to that, and we have filled it with our units in Crosby. When they were working on the power line up there, we had people that stayed at the Cuyuna Bike House all winter long. So we're willing to rent out to anyone that's going to be staying long-term. The issue that we have is, construction is not cheap, and the fact that we just built this building, our rents have to be a little bit higher than what a normal 2-bedroom, 1-bath rental property, long-term rental would be in the city of Brainerd. Not to mention we keep them furnished. So, if we have a family that's going to move in there for 6 years, then we have to take the furniture out because, one thing about having short-term rentals is they get cleaned every week or every other day or every couple weeks or whatever it is, every 13 weeks. And there's always issues, even with these brand new ones. I had to fix a light. We're always in there keeping them in tip-top shape. And so, our field of what we're, targeting is small, but in order to even make the mortgage payments on a new construction in the city of Brainerd or anywhere, that's, that was our intent. That's how we set up our financials for it, and it was really the only way that we could have done it.
Yes, please.
And I understand, and I don't have, any qualms about the business model you're using to try and get at, managing the finances, the books to make this build work out. I kind of get that. I think a couple things that strike me, one is by narrowing down your focus, whether you may be running into the Federal Fair Housing Act by excluding people. It's almost like choosing families over individual tenants blending. You might be running crosswise there with Federal Fair Housing Act if you've not looked into that already. But the other point is that the housing study that was done a few years ago for Crow Wing County, including Brainerd, really highlights the need for long-term workforce housing, and you're describing members, a section of the workforce of Brainerd. The medical professional is a part of our workforce in here, and the need for providing long-term housing is pretty highly identified as a high priority in our housing study. It's identified as a high priority in our comprehensive plan, and what I see here is a proposal that's actually taking long-term workforce housing out of the pool and returning it in a short-term use that doesn't really help us with the long ledger sheet of need for workforce housing here in the city. So that's pretty much very much a concern. I guess that's a comment more than a question. So
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Stangler, for your answers.
I guess just to that, I'm very well aware of the discriminating against, and we're not saying that, we're not turning people away. The issue is the price point that we need to be at in order to support the build that we did. People that are doing long-term housing just aren't able to spend that much on a rental unit. So, down the line, this building is not going to be probably extended stay, short-term, forever. Eventually, it will turn to long-term rental. And it's a beautiful building. It's built well, and it's gonna be there for a long, long time. So, you know, I think this is just like a section of its life that we need to get it to where it needs to be, and then it'll be part of the housing pool in the city of Brainerd. You know, we're not gonna own this building for 30 years. So.
Yeah, and the efforts that you described to try and attract applicants really came down to sort of word of mouth, and I didn't hear that you had advertised with a price point there. My guess is, as a landlord myself in the city, that you would find qualified tenants that would meet your background criteria or your screening criteria that would be able to pay a higher end and look for something that's nice like that. You know, because I agree with you, it's a nice looking building. I've not been inside, I've seen it in plan views during the 10 months ago when you had that before us, so. Anyway, I'll.
If I could comment to that.
Sure.
So, yes, I guess I kind of lost my train of thought, but, sorry. I guess one thing I was gonna say before, that the fire marshal actually was out yesterday too and did his inspection as well. So, I guess that portion has already been done.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing at 6:31 here, and I'm going to bring it back to us for discussion. So,
Mr. Chair, I have a further question for staff that I
Yes, please.
thought of. If an interim use permit is granted and that it is not used for that use for a period of time, is that an issue going back to using it for that? Does that make sense what I'm asking, James?
Yeah, so I really looked at this and considered, you know, how that would work. You know, the use is still a duplex. So whether it's a rental or interim use, obviously there's more stringent conditions set upon the interim use permit with the public hearing, conditions that can be put upon it. So unless there was a triggering event in staff's interpretation where, you know, say it's a short-term rental, and then, you know, the planning commission wanted to put a triggering event saying that once it's a long-term or extended stay, then the interim use is void. Really, I think what we'd work out with the applicant is that he'd have to notify staff when it's being used as a long-term rental versus a short-term rental.
Okay, so there's nothing like inherent unless we decide to put something there.
That's how staff's interpreting it.
Okay.
any other quick questions for staff? Otherwise, we can discuss amongst ourselves here. Yes, please, Mr. Duval.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion, please, to deny the interim use permit for 515 9th Street South in Brainerd for a short-term rental application.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on this?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
I would just ask, what would be the findings that would support the motion?
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes, please.
The findings of fact that I would offer are that the variance application that was approved 10 months previous, findings of fact there were supporting the application for a variance. At that time, that was findings of fact 3B, which stated when variances are consistent with the comp plan, staff believes this variance request is supported by Goal 1 of Chapter 3 of the Comprehensive Plan, which states provide a diverse mix of housing choices for all stages of life, income ranges, and ownership rental preferences. And they highlighted specifically Policy 5, which says ensure an adequate supply of quality and affordable housing units for current and future residents. And what's proposed here tonight does not support the findings of fact that we offered in support of the variance in September 21st, 2022.
Mr. Chair?
Please. Yeah, go ahead, guys.
I actually have a different take than you. And when I look at people trying to provide housing that would be workforce housing, that would be housing that could fill this kind of need that we're talking about with the traveling nurses, but also fill needs for people who are kind of at a startup position in life. There's time in that market when you're going to have vacancies. There's time when you're going to have extended vacancies. And the idea that you would not be allowed to do a short-term rental on that or an interim type rental, what it does is it makes a higher burden for people wanting to provide that particular product. And for me, I think if we want more of that product, we should give the people who are providing that product a lot more options to fill those gaps. It's going to bring more people into the market. It's going to make it easier for people to do that. And I actually think that the outcome you're worried about, which is we're going to have less workforce housing if we allow this type of use, I actually think we're going to have more workforce housing if we allow this type of use as a supplemental for people in the gaps, to fill in those gaps when they have short-term revenue problems.
Mr. Chair, if I may respond to that, and I agree very much with the idea you're expressing, Mr. Marone, and I think what we have no control over is whether that short-term rental goes towards medical professionals who are transitory in our community, or VRBO, or Airbnb, I think was the phrase that the applicant had used here as sort of the platforms, that it turns into vacation rental space. And the vacation rental space is what detracts from meeting our workforce housing needs. And we have no control over saying you can only rent to workforce people in our community, right? And if we say short-term rentals are okay. And that's the part that I'm getting, and I fully agree with you in the other aspects of the workforce community out there, and the way to fill in these slots in our rentals.
Mr. Chair, and I get where you're coming from. I don't know as I would, if we were talking about like a lake home or something, maybe we could find some common ground on that one. But, this is not going to be a high-end vacation rental. So in practicality, applying that particular concern to this property, to me, it would be a little bit overstated. Like, I don't think that the likelihood of that is very strong.
I'd be interested to know what the rental history is for the other two VRBOs that we have, or excuse me, there's two other short-term rental permitted properties we have here, which are not waterfront, beachfront. I think one's up on north end and one's on the south end of town, and not exactly what you'd think of as vacation property, but it's a place to, anyway.
Very good. Thank you. Further discussion? Yes, please, Mr. Cohen.
I have one question. When maybe staff could help me on this. When the study was done looking at workforce housing and how to address it, was short-term housing ever a part of it? In other words, with the $60,000 that was allocated here, 65, whatever it was there a need recognized to provide for short-term housing? In other words, was that part of the equation that the funders had?
From the Initiative Foundation funding? So I don't believe that was part of it. I'd have to go into the study to see if there's anything related to short-term rental in Crow Wing County study. I don't know that offhand.
Because I think just to continue, I think there might be I think there is a valid market for it, but we don't understand it. I don't understand, we don't understand how big it is, or maybe it's just so small we shouldn't be concerned about it. I don't know. And, but I can see how it is something that can help fill a niche. But I also can see how it's something that could say, well, let's take in these short-term things at a higher rate than as opposed to having to turn to market and provide the real long-term housing we need, which was probably the intention behind the Initiative Foundation. So that's my thinking. Anyhow.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Okay, well, I'm just going to jump in with my thoughts here. When I first saw this come through, I will admit that this landed on me all wrong, mostly because of my background with deed and being part of the group that gave the $60,000 or was a part of that. And initially, when I first reacted to this, it landed on me, all wrong also. And to your point, I know, Mr. Stangler, that you've said that there was nothing in that application that prevented you from doing this, but I would also just like to ask staff to just follow up with that and just verify with the people at deed to make sure that there isn't something that we're missing here which disqualifies this type of use. And then that being said, that's not really a part of what's in front of us tonight. Totally get that. That being said, I've also kind of been on both sides of the fence of this. I've been a part of the long-term housing conversation, been a big proponent of that, still am. But I've also noticed that myself in sitting in other city meetings with short-term rentals and have been going through life somewhat purblind with what these types of dwellings really can do for a community. So while I would probably prefer to have a long-term residence here, I also understand the need for people who are moving in between residences, people who are only in town for short-term work, traveling service providers, seasonal visitors, people who have lost their home due to fire or to other construction issues or are kicked out of their house for construction issues. And there's also a whole list of people who need short-term living for life circumstances, things beyond their control that happen in their life that force them to move out of their house or their dwelling with very short notice. So I can also see that there's a need for this also in a short term in our community. I will always come back to the fact that what concerns me most is behavior and what I see visually with my eyes when I look at a property. This means upkeep, whether it be by an owner that's a renter or a long-term owner, and behavior, whether it is a rental or a long-term owner, because believe me, we have good and bad in both scenarios. Some of our most problematic people that come before us are long-term owner occupiers. We know this, right? So I guess where I'm at on this is I find that taking the path of saying that this doesn't fit our comprehensive plan is a bit of a reach for me personally. I'm very close to neutral on this, and that's why I'm going to be asking for a roll call vote on this. But that's kind of where I am, and I think that just generally we need to be a little generally more open-minded that short-term rental doesn't mean keggers every weekend and trash in the street. So I think there are other functions behind that. So. If there's, yes, please. Mr. Norwood.
Sorry.
I'm done.
I currently am in the position of not supporting the motion. Under the premise of it's difficult. There's other ways to skin the cat. And so I agree with the motioner, but I agree, but I can't support it, if that makes sense.
I've been there.
It doesn't make sense.
I've been there many times. Further discussion? Okay, we have a motion to deny. I just want to be clear, make sure everyone's got this straight. We have a motion to deny and a second. And we're going to be voting by roll call. If you vote yes, you're voting for a denial of this IUP. If you vote no, you are voting to allow the IUP to happen. Okay? Does that sound right to everyone? All right, very good.
I feel like there should be a separate motion
Very good.
to make if this one doesn't pass.
Okay, so how would you like to play this? Would you like to vote first and then make a motion after?
This motion, and then we can have a second one.
Very good. All right, here we go. Drum roll, everyone. And Mr. Cramp, go ahead. James is going to call the roll.
Morone,
Opposed?
Gorham,
No.
Duval,
Yes.
Norwood,
No.
Grunwald,
No.
Stangline,
Yes.
Yeager.
And that's no. So,
Sure, I would make a motion to recommend that the interim use permit be approved based on the findings provided by staff with the 3 conditions recommended by staff. I would add to the 3rd condition, since we're going down this road anyway, we might as well go all the way. I would say upon sale of the property by Stangler Properties LLC, comma, or transfer of ownership within Stangler Properties LLC, comma, the interim use permit for short-term rental, da-da-da-da.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
would the motioner be open to an amendment to that motion to include a 2-year term on the permit to expire December 31st, 2025?
Point of order. Yes.
Point of order just for a second. And I'll second the motion,
Okay.
just so that way,
Got it.
yeah.
All right. So we got a,
I respect what you're asking, but no, I don't really feel a need to do that.
all right. So we have a new and exciting motion and a second on the table here. Is there any further discussion?
I know I seconded it, but where Mr. Duvall was headed is the general direction of where I was headed for, you just beat me to making a motion. And so,
So you're saying hedge your bets, in 2 years we'll look at it again if it's not a problem? The reason I wouldn't do that is because I feel like we're just adding, I mean,
the petitioner was suggesting that there is a time delay as to fulfill the proposed business plan.
so you're saying in 2 years that delay should be resolved and then this is not needed?
The timing is, as far as the timing, I'm indifferent to the timing. I just believe that it needed a close date. And so if Mr. Duvall is asking for did you say 2 years?
2 years expiring December 31st, 2025.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm indifferent to the time. That's the debatable part that we can.
Well, I can tell you where I am on that debate. We've allowed, to my knowledge, we have approved 2 of these in the last 24 months, and to my knowledge, that condition wasn't attached to either one of those 2. So my concern is that we are unfairly or perhaps we're doing this in a way that is not in alignment with the way that we have approved the others. So that's my concern with attaching
And forgive
a
me,
condition like that.
was that in a TN2?
Agreed. Yep.
Mr. Chair, if there's a nexus between what the applicant has said his business plan is and what, other commissioners would want, that would help us get to a recommendation, I'm fine considering it, but I guess I'm kind of with you. Let's just, we're going to do it, let's do it.
Well, it's on you. You're being asked to change your motion.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I'm doing a straw poll. Is this going to
Yeah.
be, is everyone going to vote against this? Because I'll be here all night. Maybe let's call the question, and if people will not vote for this one, then I'll change it.
I'd like to also remind this commission that we are advisory, so
Yeah,
whatever
we're
the outcome is of this, the
this is gonna
city
go to
council
council
ultimately will be making the decision on this, but I would encourage us to just pull the trigger on something here. So I'm not hearing a amendment to the motion, so we're going to do this by roll call also. Now, one more time, if you vote yes in favor of this, you are agreeing to allow the interim use permit to be permitted. If you vote no, you are voting no. And remember that there were 3 conditions. The third one was briefly modified. I'm not going to go into the details of that. Any questions on this before we roll call this? All right, James, here we go.
Morone,
Yes.
Gorham,
Yes.
Duval,
Yes.
Norwood,
Yes.
Grunwald,
Yes.
Stangline,
Yes.
Jaeger.
Yes. Wow. Well, there we go. Very good, thank you. Will you please, Mr. Kramvik, just kind of let the applicant know what's going to happen next steps?
Yep, so this will go to the next city council meeting, which is on August 7th, and they will vote for an approval or denial of the interim use permit.
Very good, thank you, Mr. Kramvik, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 7B. This is the consideration of allowing mixed-use buildings in the commercial corridor district. Mr. Kramvik, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a brief summary, at the June 28th EDA workshop, staff proposed allowing mixed-use development in the commercial corridor district to incentivize redevelopment in the district and to maximize housing opportunities for potential developers. Kind of along with this as well, staff is also proposing, and the EDA is you had a kind of a general consensus at the workshop that they're interested in creating a similar River to Rails district along the commercial corridor district. Part of the commercial corridor district is already in the River to Rails, but extending it kind of all the way to the Cub Food area. The River to Rails District, just as kind of a reminder, waives all building permit fees up to $150,000 of construction value, as well as waiving SAC and WAC and park dedication fees. One of the things that the EDA the workshop had directed staff to do was to talk with Brainerd Public Utilities as well as our Public Works Department to see if the utilities can handle waiving SAC and WAC fees. But so staff will be doing that tomorrow. But tonight's consideration is whether mixed-use development could be done in the commercial corridor district as well. Staff would look at this as similar to the Main Street district, in which the first floor residential units are prohibited. So right now, our Main Street district runs from Front Street down to the mid-block of it'd be Norwood and Oak Street, and then from 5th Street to 8th Street. So essentially no residential is allowed on the first floor. That's essentially how staff sees as a potential for the commercial corridor district. I did include in the second page here an example. So this is Moorhead. This is a city where I grew up. So this is First Avenue North. It's, I think, a pretty good representation of what we kind of see with Highway 210. This is kind of a gateway into Moorhead and in a similar location in and close around downtown. You see here is a 2008 picture. Pretty sparse development. There's the railroads actually on the left-hand side. Some industrial uses over there. If you go down to the 2002 picture, here's a picture. They appear to allow complete residential on the left-hand side, but there is a mixed-use development that was created on the right-hand side. So besides allowing more residential into this kind of gateway into Moorhead, it also really spurred development from some of the existing businesses that aren't mixed-use development. There's a brewery that kind of expanded and doubled in size because of the amount of residents that are in here, and then there's also a number of other businesses that, because of the amount of residents that are in this area, it really spurred development and has kind of revitalized this whole gateway into Moorhead. So just kind of a quick example, and this is really just a discussion topic tonight. Seeing if Planning Commission does want to direct staff to look further into potentially allowing mixed-use development in the commercial corridor district. Right now, it's just essentially a business district. And there is no parking requirements in the commercial corridor district, so that would maybe have to be some type of consideration. But with that, I'll turn it over to the Planning Commission. You did see there are currently 5 mixed-use development buildings within the commercial corridor district. Those are considered legal non-conforming at this time, but I'll turn it over to the Planning Commission for any comments or direction.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Gramvik. All right, guys, any questions, comments, considerations, discussion?
I think it's a great idea. I've been through that area in Moorhead, probably went to that brewery.
Probably.
I'm not going to admit to anything, but it's pretty amazing the amount of people that are out walking around.
Are you envisioning this as a conditional use or as a?
So yeah, mixed-use development is a conditional use kind of throughout all of our districts, so it would end up being a conditional use.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's the key for me also. It's a hugely powerful tool. It's allowed, but we're then allowed to attach conditions to better control. Any other questions for staff, comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please, Mr.
I guess my
Gorham.
question is, a lot of it, to you, Mr. Gramvik, it centers around what is Washington Street going to look like when the redo is done? In other words, is it going to be the kind of street that will actually support what we're trying to do? I like the idea of mixed use on there. I think that's tremendous. I think it's something we've kind of talked about before, of trying to turn Washington Street and slow it down and get more out of it and create a more hospitable place. The question is, do we think the highway plan as presented so far, I guess it's done at this point, is it going to support it?
That's something I can bring up with the Public Works Department as well, our city engineer, to get his thoughts on that part, and certainly provide a report kind of on the next part if we do bring some type of draft ordinance. I think, to your point of trying to slow traffic down, right now, some of these places, and you see in the 2008 picture, it's just these large expanses, and the more you have these large expanses, it kind of feels almost more like a super highway that's going through here. traffic speeds up, if, one of our conditions within the commercial corridor district is to bring buildings closer. Also adding height is going to kind of frame this and I think, have the desired effect of potentially, helping slow traffic or calm traffic slightly.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chair, yeah, Brent, can you freeze that picture for just a second? Wouldn't it be cool if you had like a skyway across? Thinking about the Washington example, I mean, being able to join these kinds of buildings to provide another way across a busy state highway, in addition to all of the things that are in the design for the 2025 or 2026 reconstruction of Washington Street. So this kind of, what you see there would lend itself to being able to give you that alternative, and you can imagine those being a publicly accessible, maybe it's a stairwell elevator system on the corner of those buildings that gets you across as well. So it's also going to be able to serve our ADA folks as well. So just a comment about ways that could help us.
We do actually have a couple of examples of kind of what this looks like when both the sawmill, which has main floor commercial, residential above, as well as the bicycle shop. Same, similar kind of concept, sitting close to the road, commercial on the bottom, storefront on the bottom, residential on top. So it's kind of a little bit the look. Any other discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
I'm enthusiastically in support of the idea of mixed use in this area. I think this is rather hideous in a lot of ways, just from a design standpoint. And I mean, if the idea is we want to restrict the first floor to commercial and the rest be residential, I've seen a lot of success where instead of doing it that way, you actually have what would be a very light architectural standard, not the kind of architectural standard where you're speccing the type of siding and the color and all that, but you're speccing where the door opens up onto, how wide the ground floor units can be, so you don't get kind of a monolithic, thing. If you look at the building on the left, it's actually pushed back quite a bit from where the sidewalk would be, and the openings are not on that side. So if you're walking through there, it's kind of almost as desolate as it was in the pre-picture. There's really no interaction. On the other side, you get a little bit of interaction, but the doors are on the side of the building, not on the street side. And so you lose that kind of connectivity. I toured one in Greenville, South Carolina, not too long ago, where they had a similar concept, but on the first floor, they were very flexible about residential and commercial. And they didn't have enough commercial to fill the space initially. And so they had a couple that were residential on the first floor. But from the streetwise, they opened up the same way and they looked the same way. And I talked to the developer and he's like, yeah, as soon as we fill these, we're gonna make these commercial too. But again, kind of like with the last one, it was a way to cash flow it in the interim because there was more residential demand than there was commercial demand. I also, step back and look at the second and third stories. And yes, having them as residences is really great. But when you allow them the flexibility to also be office or something else, again, you just get a building that functions more like the Easy Rider store would have functioned historically, or the Sawmill Inn would have functioned historically, where you're kind of, whatever works, as long as it's at this scale. I think what we'd want to get away from is the idea that, like on the left, you'd have one big wall for 500 feet with no breakup in the continuity, no human interaction, because that just kills your walkability. So I'm enthusiastic, but I wouldn't approach it the way that it's being recommended. I would tweak the standard a little bit from what is being recommended.
Other comments?
So basically broadening the staff assignment to bring in some sort of architectural considerations in addition to just sort of that residential use as they're proposing.
Yeah, I feel like developers would be more open to a kind of standard that allowed them a lot of flexibility in use in exchange for a little bit of, design requirements.
And we talked about stepping back upper floors a certain distance in some of our previous conversations through the comp plan and the development of the ordinance here, right? That you have a storefront and maybe you step back from the street on the next level up or maybe 2 levels up, and gives you less of that wall effect and more texture, if you would, a visual texture to the wall.
It would depend on the place. If you have a wide street width, you can go quite a bit up before it starts to feel that way. On a narrower street, you've got some height. Yeah, the height would be different. But in this zone, you could go 3 or 4 stories before you had that effect in any way.
Commercial corridor, correct, is Washington Street.
Yep, that's correct. So commercial corridor from the river to about the Cub Food area. That's considered commercial corridor. Cub Food then would be general commercial and kind of the strip malls around it. And then once you cross the river, that's general commercial as well.
So we have some defined parameters within the road and the width of what we're talking about.
Yeah, you generally, it's a kind of a 3-to-1, 6-to-1 ratio of width to height. Gives you good proportions. So you wouldn't want to step back until you exceeded that. And that's a pretty big building.
Yes, please, Mr. Kramvik.
Yeah, so I do think Mr. Marone made some excellent comments there on the building look. Certainly, when I look at the building on the left-hand side, there's really no interest to that, and it doesn't look like a particularly pleasing building. I know just getting the residents down here is what really has spurred development to some of the other buildings. So kind of my recommendation with this is we haven't really talked about, kind of next steps after our parking ordinance. So, and I do have that in my staff report where the Parking Commission will be meeting August 2nd to go over the parking ordinance. And then at the August meeting, we'll bring a draft of the parking ordinance. And then there's kind of next steps on what we work on next. So staff was going to recommend actually looking at our design standards at our next one and taking a look in our general development and design standards. So I think this would be a relatively easy one, adding mixed use to the commercial corridor. But if we did those in conjunction with reviewing our design standards, and staff is going to recommend we look at it for single family, 2 to 4, as well as 5+ and multifamily. So kind of looking at a whole thing for our design standards. I think these could be kind of done simultaneously.
Yes, please.
And how much of a wrench does the parking question, how much of a wrench do we throw into if you start requiring parking design elements into architectural design for mixed use?
So right now we're working on the parking ordinance. Parking Commission is going to review it. One thing that we did toss around with the next one is in our Main Street downtown district. Maybe there's a requirement to have half the amount of required parking spaces for a place, or maybe simply that there's going to have to be some type of parking plan provided by the developer in order to construct a project like this as part of a conditional use permit. So there's a couple things I think we still have to work out with our Parking Commission and Planning Commission on how this would really work, because obviously a large building like this would need parking. So whether it's whether they're coming to some agreement to a property next to them, some joint agreement, or they're doing underground parking. That's kind of how staff envisions that. But, getting some direction here would, maybe help provide us some direction then as we're going to the Planning Commission and kind of future Parking Commission meetings on working on the parking ordinance.
Thank you, James. Yeah, Mr. Norwood, I'll just jump in on that also. I would say from a developer's perspective, parking can have a huge impact on how you would attack a project and even possibly complete viability. If we were to say, for instance, you have to have underground parking or something like that, you could be potentially imposing financial burdens that would render virtually all projects not viable. That's an extreme case, but to answer your question, it could have an impact, yes, especially if it's minimums. All right, any other discussion, conversation here? So staff is looking for us to, is looking for us to direct them to revise the zoning code to allow for multi-use in the corridor district. It sounds like we still have some heavy lifting to do as far as potential design standards, architectural standards, even maybe overlaid with parking standards and that. But I think we're just kind of generally, you're looking for some head nodding to say, yeah, we kind of like where this is going. So at this point, I'm going to ask for people who are head shakers, not nodders. Okay, very good. You got what you need, James, you think?
We do have what we need.
All right, fantastic.
Just maybe just to follow up, if we are, just to build off of what Director Kramvik said about the queue of other things, as we start wrapping up the parking, if we could look at the grand list and we, so as we think about placing this or something else in that queue, it'd be helpful just to refresh ourselves, or beyond the 6-month point, be helpful to just refresh ourselves as we've gotten close to knocking off one of those. Are the priorities still the same?
And we
Or do
can bring
wanna
that to
reshuffle
the next
deck?
meeting. Yep.
We could start meeting weekly.
Almost there.
Very good. Okay, as we're going to move on. We're going to move on. Just so everyone knows, as you read the packet, item 7C was technically canceled for tonight, but it was actually postponed to the next meeting, just so everyone knows. That will be re-emerging in our near future. I'm going to move on to item number 8, which is our public forum.
Before you
Please.
do, I'd like to make a motion relating back to 7A, to direct staff to investigate approaches, precedents, benefits, consequences of limiting short-term rentals in our city, and to just report back to us on what examples are out there, we've had some discussion about the pro and con here at this desk, and whether we could have a look at that, and I wouldn't put that, I guess I might put it on that list of stuff, but I would like to see us have a good, careful eye at that, and then some information we can act on. So I'd like to offer that motion, please.
We have a motion there. Do you have a grasp on the motion? You okay with what he's asking to be done here? Okay.
I'll second the
And we
motion.
got a motion and a second. Any discussion? I'm just going to jump in real quick. I think it's probably a good idea, because I have this feeling in the back of my head that when the comprehensive plan was written, nobody was asking, is there a need for short-term rental? This is, to me, the comprehensive plan perhaps doesn't cover it or address it as a need, because it really didn't exist, or was even, if it did exist, it wasn't acknowledged as a performing status in our community. So I think it's a great exercise, and good idea for us to get our head wrapped around how it's doing, what other communities are doing, and how we can better apply it. So excellent point. Thank you. So we have a motion, a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Very good, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to open the public forum at 7:07. This is the time for anyone to come forward who might have anything they would love to chat about before this esteemed commission. Do we have anyone online? No one online, and I see no one in the house. So I'm going to close the public forum at 7:07, and we are going to move on to item number 9, which is staff reports. Whoever raises their hand first goes first. No one's, there we go. James Kramvik, you're up.
So update on VCV. So VCV has not contacted the Community Development Department. This is the cryptocurrency that purchased the industrial park lots. They've not contacted staff since the revised plans were approved by the EDA for buildings instead of outdoor storage as a principal use. I do believe they're still working with Brainerd Public Utilities on kind of final utility plans and getting the power that they need to their site. So, but for the last couple of months, staff has not heard anything about a building permit or any, I guess, anything from them on that front. I did mention the Parking Commission will be meeting August 2nd to review the draft of the off-street parking ordinance, and a final draft will come back to the Planning Commission on August 16th. So that'll be kind of the final review, and then the next Planning Commission would be the actual public hearing. So a few more steps to that for the draft of the parking ordinance. Also at the last City Council meeting, the Council did hold the first reading for the Country Manor Planned Unit Development District. So that's the ordinance amendment to create the new zoning district. They anticipated also approve the preliminary and final plat, as well as the concept plan and general development plan for the PUD. In order for the final plat and the preliminary plat to be approved, there will have to be a second reading of the ordinance, as well as approval from City Council. After that, Country Manor will have to work with the City of Brainerd on a development agreement and then bring a final plan for their planned unit development. So those are kind of next steps. I'd anticipate probably 2 or 3 months to resolve some of that stuff. And kind of the last one, City Council approved the redevelopment TIF and redevelopment TIF plan for 805 Laurel Street at the last City Council as well. And with that, that's everything I have.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Edwards, do you have anything?
Yes, just briefly, and it sort of came up during the discussion of the interim use permit that this property has had things come along in the past, and one of the things that we're working on in the department is building a running 2-year list, at least for the city council level, of the planning and zoning processes that have gone through planning commission and city council, and where they're at in the process currently, so that we can have a clearer picture of once something comes through this commission or the council. For instance, if it's a conditional use permit and that was supposed to prompt some action and nothing has happened for 2 years, that might be something that's good to note, or in a rezoning or something along that line. So that is something we're actively working on creating, which may be a helpful reference.
And that'll be in our community development report for City Council.
Awesome, okay. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Anything, Mr. Ballmer? Nothing tonight? Okay, we're going to move to item number 10. This is our commission member reports. I'll start at my left. Anyone who would like to go? Mr. Marone, anything? Tiffany? Mr. Norwood?
Nothing to add.
Oh, I got in front of you anyways. See how that works?
Oh, I've got nothing.
See, I start left.
Yeah.
Okay, I just have one quick thing. I was able to attend, I believe it was Friday the 14th. This is the Talia Quartet that happened at our brand new park, the Lyman P. White Park, and it was phenomenal. I just want to say, there was about 120, 130 people there. They were having a fantastic time. It sounded good. It looked good. Off in the on the riverside, there was about a dozen kids who were playing on the playground equipment, which was highly criticized as to whether or not it would be played upon.
It's not a playground, it's a play area.
That the play area, and the kids were there nonstop for over an hour and a half straight, and never left. So, and having fun. Also, I will say that a couple of members from the Lakes Area Music Festival came forward and spoke very highly of the development in our city, and just what a treasure that was to have something like that in support of the arts. So just wanted to shout out that good job to everyone that worked on that, and offer some positive feedback on our beautiful park down there. That's all I have. You? Anything? I knew you were going to say that. Anything else down the road? Yep, Mr. Duval?
Pass.
Okay, very good. With that, we'll be looking for a motion to an adjournment.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Got a motion to adjourn?
Second.
And a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you, everyone.